Welcome everyone. Today we'll have a very special Barbarian farming build for Season 5. Now looking behind me, I'm sure you can tell what this build is about. This is going to be a Whirlwind Barbarian build that is updated for the latest meta, using new unique items and also different concept of gaining more damage. So this Whirlwind Barbarian build, even though it looks traditional, but it has a lot of interesting features that I want to share with you guys. Now, one of the reasons I'm calling this one a Summoner Barbarian is to have a look at the summons cooldown with Call of Vengeance. We have ways of reducing the cooldowns and even more cooldown reduction. So if you look at the Call of Vengeance, notice that we're permanently summoning the Call of Vengeance, and before they disappear, we're actually summoning them again. One of the big highlights for this build, for the Summoner Barbarian, is that you are getting your Summoner's Agent, and because of unique pens of lowering cooldown reduction, together with your helmet, Harlequin's Crest, and also together with killing bleeding enemies, you will be lowering cooldown reductions even further. So this together allows you to have a massive cooldown reduction, and you'll be summoning 3 of your buddies all the way as you fight against enemies for this particular variant for the Whirlwind Summoner Barbarian. Now, one of the biggest highlights for this Barbarian build is that it can clear the Horde tier 8 super fast, and this also enables you to get tons of Aether. So we're currently watching a replay from one of the Chinese players, and he has already gotten close to 1000 Aether before getting to the boss. Now skip forward a little bit as he fight the boss. I do believe he got very close to 1100 Aether on this particular run. Now this particular test run replay was before the update, so with the latest update, he can easily get over 1100 Aether using the similar setup and also the method of farming the Horde. So this is a very interesting Barbarian build that I really want to share with you guys if you want to be farming for your masterwork or any of the materials in the Horde. Now on the second half of the video, I have also screenshot and also summarized all the best picks you can be going for this particular build. This also works for any of the build, any of the class. So we'll be going through this on the second part of what you should be prioritizing and also how should you be synergizing this for the highest gain for the Aethers in the Horde. Now briefly explain how the build works and also the build concept. Well, the first thing with this particular build is that you're not using a two-handed sword, you're actually using a polearm for the additional vulnerability damage. Over here, only 1 point is added to Whirlwind, and we're actually gaining most of the damage coming from the Dust Devils together with Bleed. Using the legendary nodes and also the core skill passive, we're stacking critical chance and also bleeding damage with critical damage to deal the highest bleeding damage and tons of AoE. And this build is super survivable, super tanky, and also super fast. We also use the unique pens for the Call of Vengeance to reduce its cooldowns and also increase the damage, together with abilities to summon even more Dust Devils with the Call of Vengeance. This build is one of the fastest Barbarian farming build, and you can see most of the time you're just spinning around, casting your shields, and also summoning more Dust Devils. It is definitely super fast, even compared to other classes. This also farms a lot of materials and also is very satisfying to play the Barbarian. Now before we jump over to the builder's guide, I would like to say a big thanks and also credits to PXX over here. We're learning from his build, which he was actually learning from Chinese content creators. So translating the build over here, let's come over to the skills. Now what you can see on the builder's guide is that there are 2 alternatives I have added for you guys. So the first setup of the build actually doesn't use the two-handed sword with the grandfather. Now for those of you that want to use the grandfather, there is a small adjustment, but you can still use the grandfather. We'll also discuss the difference between the 2 sets and also when should you be using those particular sets. So coming over to the gears and also choice of unique items. We'll be using 3 uber unique for the first particular set with Harlequin's Quest, Tyrio's Might, and also Ring of the Starless. On the second set, you can adjust for the grandfather, but the content creator has mentioned that the grandfather actually deals a little less damage, but you'll become much tankier of course with the bonus health. So in terms of the set, other than the 3 uber unique items, you can be using a number of unique items, together with Fist of Feet, increased critical chance and also lucky hit chance, and also the new unique pens for the Call of Vengeance. This will dramatically reduce the cooldowns of Call of Vengeance and also allows you to create even more Dust Devils as you deal increasing damage. Now in terms of the other legendaries, we're focusing on Dust Devil damage, creating Dust Devils, creating even more Dust Devils, and also abilities to create even more Dust Devils with the shots. we'll be reducing the shells with the bolt shifting, together with the ability to bleed enemies directly as we go into Berserk, and also abilities to increase physical damage. Now, in order to maintain our Berserk duration, we'll be going with the Relentless Berserker aspects, which is essential to keep ourselves in Berserk form as we deal additional damage with core skills. Now over here, I do want to state that the build is focusing on one particular stat of the gear on the set of the choices of effects. But should you be able to get higher grade effects of those items, this build becomes even stronger. But the build itself is not that intensive in terms of gear choices. So you can see most of the choices here will only have one grand effects. And one thing to highlight is we're using a polearm over here. So the polearm itself will provide us with additional vulnerability damage, which will in return translates into more bleeding damage with the legendary Paragon node. And here we're stacking a lot of strength, which not only give us additional armor, but also the highest damage stacking for this particular build. Now because we're stacking more strength, we'll be getting additional critical damage on the weapons, and also additional strength with the armor pieces. We'll be stacking all resistance for the barbarians over here. Now briefly going through the choice of skills. The first thing you can notice is only 1 point is allocated into Whirlwind, because we're actually not getting the damage from Whirlwind, but rather getting enemies to be bleeding and also creating dust devils coming from Whirlwind. We'll be trying to get as much chance of making enemies vulnerable, because this also increases our damage deal multiplicatively. Now over here, we'll be going with the 3 shouts together with additional resource gain, additional health, and also additional fortify. We have Iron Skin as one of the defensive skills to provide us with additional healing and also barriers. Most of the skill points are pretty straightforward. We'll also be dealing additional damage to injured enemies. 3 points is allocated to cut to the bone, and you'll be going with higher skill points into cut to the bone by using the amulet, and this allows us to deal even higher damage against vulnerable enemies. We'll be using the ultimate Call of Vengeance, and this is even amplified by using the unique pens. 3 points allocated here because we're using a 2-handed polearm for the Whirlwind. So it's important, guys, to select the weapon for Whirlwind as 2-handed polearm. And finally, of course, Gashing Wood allows us to stack critical chance, critical damage, and also higher bleeding damage to deal higher bleeding damage even further. Now briefly going through the Paragons. We have Exploit for higher vulnerability damage, we have Might for increased damage with 2-handed weapons, we have Twister, which allows us to deal higher damage with Dust Devils, very essential. We have Marshal for the lower shots cooldown, and also Executioner by using the polearm. And yes guys, we're using a polearm this time for the 2-handed slashing weapon. And finally, of course, we'll be going with higher critical damage by using Wealth. Now some of the nodes of legendary powers you want to focus on is definitely Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage allows you to stack vulnerability damage by increasing your bleeding damage. So the higher vulnerability damage you stack, the higher bleeding damage you will deal. And over here we do have a few other nodes with Disseminator, which allows you to deal higher damage and also making enemies vulnerable. Now while berserking, we also have increased critical strike chance and also attack speed, together with kill bleeding enemies to gain additional berserk duration and also increasing damage while we're berserk. Now briefly going through the skill rotations and also combination for the build. While the build itself is very straightforward, you'll be casting multiple shouts, and with the lower cooldowns you can cast them whenever they activate. This is also the case for your Call of Engine. Because your Call of Engine have so much cooldown reduction, you're pretty much having constant 3 engines on the team to help you deal additional damage and also trigger additional effects. The only thing you want to be a little defensive is going to be your Iron Skin. This will provide you with a barrier against enemies that hits hard and provide you a little bit of healing. And as you can see over here, once your HP drops to a certain level, using Iron Skin will be a defensive chance. You'll always be spinning around with your Whirlwind, and this creates a lot of tornadoes together with a Tyros Might to deal even additional damage. Most of the enemies will be bleeding to death, so make sure you go on to different enemies, and as you spin around and also create more Dust Devil, you can pretty much stay in the center of the map and kills everything in sight. Now against the boss, the build is actually pretty straightforward. Again, you are spinning in front of 3 different bosses, and if I go back a little bit, you can see that while spinning in front of 3 bosses, you are staggering them and also you're dealing damage to all of the bosses. The build is very straightforward and it doesn't require much of the movement, and it is just spinning around to spin to win, right? Now, I have to say, compared to other classes, the build does have a small weakness against single target. As you can see over here, it still deals sizable damage, but compared to a class like Sorcerers, maybe Rogue, or maybe Necromancer that we had a look previously, the build does lack a little bit of single target damage. Now, during this particular replay, I also want to show you guys what is the best way to get the highest Aether using different choices in the game. But because this particular replay is actually in Chinese, I actually screenshotted and also translated all the choices that the content creator took during this particular run, which he got closer to 1100 Aether in one run. So here are the orders of choices that he picked. And after looking at those, we'll also have a small summary. So the focus will be getting additional Hellbound hunting you and also getting additional Aether. Getting additional event to be spawned is actually really good as well. And as you can see, he will be focusing on getting 1+ additional Hellbound whenever he can. This is by far the best amplifier to get additional Aether. And during this time, if you don't get additional Hellbound, he was getting Soulspire ×2 additional Aether, and again getting additional Hellbound. And because he got Soulspire getting additional 2x Aether, he can get even more Aether by building on the Soulspire. Now, in the further cases that you don't get those additional multipliers, getting additional Aether from the Aether Fiend, and also the final one, I couldn't find the English version, is to get 2x chances to summon elites. So now as a summary for the best way to get additional Aether in the Infernal Horde. So basically, you're looking for everything that is related to the Hellbound, and that is pretty straightforward. For the cases that you don't get Hellbound, the second best alternative will be getting additional events to be spawned. Together with combining synergies with the Soulspire and also elites that summons multiple times will give you the best alternative if you don't get the top two. And using this method and trying out this particular build, I'm sure you guys can easily get over 900 or 1000 Aether with the latest update with Diablo 4 for Season 5. Now before we finish, another big thank you for PXX for sharing this particular build. And should you want to know more about this build, I recommend coming over to his videos and have a look at the comments, because he does provide additional insights, as you can see over here, about getting better buffs, getting different weapons compared to the Grandfather, which he doesn't recommend, and how much vulnerability you need to get the best out of the legendary Paragon Knot with Hemorrhage. And he also mentioned that he did not get all of his glyph to max level. So this is not gonna be a gear intensive build should you want to try this one to farm with barbarians. Now for those of you that wanted the notes for the tier 8 Horde farming strategy, I'll have those notes available in the links below for you to have a look at those particular screenshots.